You believe humans are weak, Zalnor began. You think they're disorganized, fearful, easy prey. A murmur of agreement spread through the ranks, the officers nodding as if this truth were self-evident. Zalnor's species, the Greylicks, had built an empire through conquest, their superior technology and ruthless tactics crushing all who opposed them. Humanity, in their eyes, was just another stepping stone toward further expansion. Zalnor paused, letting the silence fill the room, then continued. There was a time when I believed the same. He turned to a holographic map that flickered into view, showing a distant sector on the edge of Greylicks, controlled space. A lonely, unremarkable planet orbited a dying sun, its surface covered in small, scattered settlements. It was marked in red, a human outpost. It was years ago, Zalnor said, pointing to the planet. A colony much like the one we face now. Small, peaceful. No military presence to speak of. Our scouts reported that the humans there were docile, complacent. We watched them for weeks. Weeks. It was a long time for a Greylicks invasion force to wait. The junior officers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the notion of delaying what seemed like an inevitable victory. They lived simple lives, Zalnor continued. Farmers, engineers, traders, going about their daily business as if they were untouchable. They didn't fight. They didn't resist. Whenever our scouts showed their presence, the humans would retreat, hide inside their habitats, never confronting us. It was almost laughable. They offered us nothing. A sharp chuckle escaped one of the officers at the back of the room, quickly stifled as Zalnor's gaze swept across the room. The general's eyes hardened. That's what we thought, too, he said darkly. We assumed their retreat was a sign of weakness, so we attacked. The hologram zoomed in on the planet, showing the Greylicks fleet descending onto the surface. Hundreds of ships darkened the sky, overwhelming the unarmed human settlements below. It was easy, Zalnor admitted. Our first strikes were unchallenged. We tore through their infrastructure. Power grids went down, supply lines were cut, and still, the humans did nothing. They ran, scattered like frightened animals. We captured a few leaders, civilians. It didn't matter. They all acted the same, scared, submissive. A small, satisfied smile crossed one officer's face. So they were weak, then. That's what we thought, Zalnor repeated, his voice suddenly cold. But what we didn't realize, what none of us realized, was that the humans weren't running out of fear. They were waiting, watching. He leaned closer to the map, tracing the lines of the human settlements with a clawed finger. Every move we made, they studied. Every raid, every strike. They let us believe we were winning, all while they were preparing. Zalnor straightened, pacing now, his tone sharpening. The humans didn't need a military presence. They didn't need warships or fortresses. They had something far more dangerous. They had patience. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the victory speech they had expected. Zalnor's words were unsettling, a seed of doubt that none of them wanted to acknowledge. They could have fought us from the beginning, Zalnor said, his voice rising. But they didn't. They let us come. We were so blinded by our own arrogance, by our hunger for conquest, that we never saw the trap. He stopped, standing tall before the group, the holographic map casting an eerie glow over his features. You think humans are weak because they didn't fight back immediately, but that's their strength. They lure you in, make you think you've won before the battle even begins. And when they strike... The room was deathly quiet. No one dared interrupt. Zalnor's voice dropped to a low growl. When they strike, it's swift, brutal, and final. You don't even realize you've lost until it's too late. He let the words hang in the air, their weight sinking into the minds of his officers. They had been eager for glory, for the thrill of crushing yet another species beneath the might of the Greylicks. But now, as Zalnor's story unfolded, that eagerness had turned to something colder, something closer to fear. You want to fight humans? Zalnor asked, his gaze hard. Then understand this. Never mistake their calm for submission. What you see as weakness is merely the quiet before the storm. The map blinked off, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment no one spoke. Then Zalnor turned, his final words a quiet warning. When that storm comes, you won't survive it. The alien fleet's commander stood in the observation deck, looking down at the human colony. Smoke rose lazily from destroyed buildings, and the Greylick's war banners fluttered in the wind, symbols of victory. Commander Valtor, one of Zalnor's most ambitious officers, allowed himself a rare smile. "They are broken," he remarked, his voice full of confidence. "Their defenses were a joke. It's only a matter of time before they surrender completely." Zalnor, standing silently beside him, didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the planet below, but his mind was elsewhere, recalling every move the humans had made or hadn't made. Valtor misinterpreted his silence as approval. "We underestimated how easy it would be. These humans, they're soft. They crumble at the first sign of real power." The Greylick's invasion had unfolded exactly as planned, or so they thought. Initial raids on the human colony had been devastating. The outpost communications were cut, their energy grids disabled, and their leaders captured. Yet, there had been no organized resistance. To the Greylicks, it appeared as if humanity had no will to fight. Valtor's arrogance was contagious. Other officers, emboldened by their early victories, began to believe that the humans posed no threat at all. The Greylick soldiers on the surface relaxed their guard, setting up temporary outposts among the ruins of human settlements. What little remained of human life skulked in the shadows, out of sight, out of mind. For weeks, the Greylicks held the colony in a firm grip, but there was an eerie stillness to it. The humans offered no resistance. They barely reacted, continuing to retreat deeper into their broken cities, fleeing whenever Greylick's patrols approached. It was as if they had accepted their fate. "They're cowards," one officer sneered during a briefing. "They don't even have the courage to fight us." Valtor agreed. "We've broken them. There's no reason to delay the final sweep. We'll crush what's left, and the planet will be ours by the end of the week." The confidence was palpable, spreading through the ranks like wildfire. Patrols became lax. Soldiers loitered at their posts, and high-ranking Greylick's officers boasted about their impending triumph. They had grown complacent, seduced by the illusion of victory. But Zalnor remained uneasy. His instincts, honed over decades of warfare, gnawed at him. Something about the humans' behavior was wrong. Yes, they had retreated, but there was no panic, no desperation. It was too orderly, too calculated. It felt like they were waiting for something. Zalnor couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. But he had a distinct impression that the humans were observing every move they made, studying them, planning. But what could they be planning? The outpost had no military. Their best defenses had already crumbled. There was nothing left. Was there? The general's unease grew, but it was too late to change course. The Greylick's high command had already committed to a full invasion. Orders were given to move the bulk of their forces onto the planet's surface, to root out the final pockets of human resistance. Valtor led the charge, personally overseeing the deployment of additional troops into the shattered cities. "I'll make sure they regret ever thinking they could hold out against us," Valtor said smugly, preparing to join the ground forces. "Be careful, Commander," Zalnor warned, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Never assume a battle is won until it is truly over." Valtor laughed. "With all due respect, General, I think this battle is already over." The Greylick's army descended upon the planet, overwhelming the remaining human settlements with sheer numbers. Buildings were razed, and civilians were rounded up. The humans still didn't resist. They fled, as always, but never fought back. Valtor, now fully convinced of his own superiority, ordered a complete lockdown of the planet's largest city. His forces combed through every street, every building, searching for the final remnants of the human population. It was a meticulous operation, one that would, in theory, break the colony once and for all. Yet, amidst all the chaos, Zalnor could feel it, the quiet, invisible presence of something waiting in the shadows. He couldn't explain it to his officers, couldn't put the feeling into words, but he knew better than to ignore it. Days passed, and the Greylock soldiers grew restless. The humans had gone silent. There were no more sightings, no more fleeing civilians. The planet seemed empty. Commander Valtor declared their victory inevitable, a mere formality now. But Zalnor was not convinced. He could sense the tension hanging in the air, like the calm before a violent storm. And then it began. Without warning, the humans struck. The first sign that something was wrong came in the dead of night. The Greylock soldiers stationed on the planet's surface were jarred awake by a series of distant, muffled explosions. At first, they thought it was human sabotage, small, desperate acts of defiance. But within minutes, the explosions grew louder, closer, more coordinated. Commander Valtor, roused from his command tent, scowled as he watched the sky light up with flashes. "What is this?" he barked to his officers. "Some last-ditch human effort to save themselves? Pathetic." He ordered an immediate counteroffensive, confident that whatever the humans had planned, it was futile. His forces, outnumbering the humans 10-1, would crush any resistance. But when his communication lines went down, when the lights in the Greylock's command post flickered and died, the smug certainty on his face began to crack. Without warning, a barrage of human drones descended upon the Greylock's outposts. Silent and deadly, they targeted the Greylock's most critical infrastructure: fuel depots, supply caches, command centers. Each drone strike was precise, devastating, leaving the Greylock's forces in complete disarray. Soldiers scrambled, shouting orders, but their attempts at retaliation were met with eerie silence. "They've cut our comms," a panicked officer yelled, struggling to raise anyone on the interplanetary channels. "We're blind." Zalnor stood on the surface now, watching the chaos unfold. He had feared this, sensed that the humans were playing a longer game. Their retreat hadn't been cowardice. It had been strategy. The Greylock had been lulled into a false sense of security, their overconfidence blinding them to the real danger. Valtor, still in denial, led a squad of elite Greylock soldiers into the city, hoping to flush out the human resistance. But the humans had already adapted. They didn't meet the Greylock in open combat. Instead, they struck from the shadows, small teams of highly trained fighters, emerging from hidden tunnels, buildings, and underground bunkers. They knew the terrain far better than their invaders, using every inch of the ruined city to their advantage. "They were waiting for us," Zalnor muttered, watching in grim recognition as the Greylock's forces were systematically dismantled. "We played right into their hands." The humans' brutality was shocking. Once they began their assault, it was swift and unrelenting. They didn't give the Greylock time to regroup, to form a coherent defense. They didn't offer mercy. Every Greylock soldier they found was eliminated with ruthless efficiency. There was no hesitation, no negotiation. Valtor's squad was ambushed deep within the city. The human forces hit them from every direction, utilizing guerrilla tactics that left the Greylock disoriented and terrified. One by one, the Greylock soldiers fell, their advanced armor and weaponry useless against the humans' calculated, savage strikes. As the bodies of his soldiers piled up, Valtor's bravado shattered. "Fall back!" he screamed, trying to rally the few survivors. But it was too late. The humans had surrounded them, cutting off every escape route. Valtor himself was cornered in a narrow alley, his once proud posture reduced to trembling fear. The last thing he saw was the cold, unblinking eyes of a human soldier as the blade descended. Back at the command center, Zalnor received the report of Valtor's death with little emotion. He had expected this outcome. The Greylock had underestimated humanity's resolve, and more critically, their ability to turn weakness into strength. For weeks they had waited, letting the Greylock believe they had won, all the while preparing their lethal counterstrike. By dawn, the human assault was over. The once mighty Greylock's forces had been decimated, their command structure obliterated. The few remaining soldiers scattered, hunted down one by the relentless human fighters. The planet, which had seemed so easily conquered just days before, was now a graveyard for Greylock's ambitions. Zelnor, one of the few survivors, stood amidst the wreckage, surveying the devastation. His junior officers, those who had once been so eager for conquest, were gone, lost in the massacre. The Greylock's fleet, still in orbit, received his final transmission, a stark warning sent to the homeworld. "We underestimated them." Zalnor's voice, hollow and defeated, echoed across the Greylock's command channels. "We thought the humans were weak because they didn't fight, but their silence was not surrender. It was strategy. They lured us into a trap, and when they struck, they did so with a ferocity we couldn't match. There was no battle, no glorious victory, only swift annihilation." He paused, glancing around the smoldering ruins of the Greylock's outpost. "Never mistake their calm for weakness," he said softly, repeating his earlier warning. "When humans strike, it is swift, brutal, and final." The transmission ended. Above the planet, the Greylock's fleet disengaged, retreating into the vastness of space, broken and humiliated. The aftermath of the human assault would ripple through the Greylock's empire for years to come. They had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be provoked. Their patience was not submission, but a deadly calm before the storm, a storm that no one, not even the mighty Greylocks, could withstand.